Hello and welcome to the Sunset Gratitude Summit. I'm your host, Emily Silva Hoekstra, the author of Sunset Gratitude. Today, my guest is Katy Seppi. Her 4-year infertility journey ended with a hysterectomy in 2017. She used her background in community organizing to create gathering places for childless people to connect, access support, and talk about the common things that weave through their experiences. She hosts the Childless Collective Summit virtually for the past 3 years, which have brought almost 100 speakers and over 8,000 attendees together. In addition to the Childless Collective Summit, she also hosts the Childless Collective, an online community which is a year-round hub of connection and support for childless women and non-binary people. She holds a Master's of Social Work from UGA with an emphasis in community empowerment and program development. Her current home is Savannah, Georgia. Let's get right into it. Hi, Katy. Thank you so much for coming on today and speaking to me about your journey to hope.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk with you.
So I want to start with this blog that you created. I love the title, Chasing Creation. Can you tell me a little bit about how you chose that title and why you chose that title?
Yeah, so when I was originally kind of stepping out talking about being childless, everything I did was under that name of Chasing Creation. And um, really, it was this feeling that I had of having spent, years trying to create a child and then feeling that weight of like, I couldn't create this thing that I wanted more than anything else. And I started seeing that I was doing things in my life, like expressing creativity in other ways or having like projects I was working on or other things I was focused on that were a type of creation, a type of like using creativity and that I was being able to like accomplish or see the results of or finish. So, I mean, even just an easy example was like I was doing a kitchen remodel during infertility and just being able to have something so hands-on that I could like do and see the results of, it felt really good. And so, the name of Chasing Creation came to me as this idea that even though I wasn't able to create this thing that I really wanted in my life of a child, that I still had the capacity to create things in the world and to create a life that I love. And this like kind of power of creation was something that I could still tap into in other ways. And that to me at the time felt really powerful. So
Yeah, it can be really hard to chase after this ultimate creation of a child. And did you feel that your creativity waned during infertility, or did you feel that it flourished? How long was your journey?
so I went through infertility, I guess about 3.5 years. That from when I started trying to like when I decided I wasn't going to keep trying, maybe closer to 4 years, somewhere in there. And I mean, I would definitely say during that time, my creativity really like was in a slump because I think, well, for a few reasons. Like one, I think just the logistics of going through infertility. I was going to so many doctor's appointments and um, thinking about my cycle and what days am I going to be most fertile. And then you're waiting for like the when you can start testing, and then you're waiting for when you might be ovulating. It's just like it was so all consuming for me of just what was on my mind and what like the energy it took. That I feel like it kind of took over for a while where I didn't really have room for a lot of other stuff because it just felt all consuming in a way. And then I also think there was so much grief that came with it. And I don't know. I think for me, my grief became an avenue for creativity later, like after I'd processed some of it and wasn't in like the depths of it. But I would definitely say that, during the time I was going through infertility, I had a lot of grief and that really inhibited any kind of like creativity or vibrancy, I guess. Just being in that grief place. So yeah.
Yeah, grief is all consuming and can actually be this place where there's this nothingness, this black hole sometimes. There's a lot of different analogies that come up with grief. How
Mhm.
long would you say, I know grief never goes away, but how long was it from the grieving period to actually creating again?
Whew, that so I just want to preface this by saying that, like you said, like grief doesn't really just go away, right? I think it's something that we all like every human will deal with grief at some point around something, most likely multiple things, and the process looks different for everyone. So I'm always kind of hesitant to put like numbers on things because I don't want people to compare like, well, why am I still grieving? Or wow, that took a long time. I was fine in this amount of time or whatever. Cause I just don't want to like try to normalize that this is how long it took for me. So this is the standard that other people should measure against. But so with that caveat, I will say just my personal experience, I would say that I started getting into some pretty deep grief maybe about 2 years into my infertility. Because I think that's the point where it became clear that this may not work out. Like, the first 2 years, well, the first year I didn't know I was infertile. So it was just like trying, and it was like every
Mhm.
month it was like, this might be the month. And then it kind of got into, oh, this isn't working. Maybe I need to see a doctor. And then, trying different interventions, getting different um, feedback from doctors, trying to figure out what's going on. So I think it took me a few years into that process to really realize, like, okay, the options that I have left for becoming a parent are getting less and less, and it's seeming less likely. And so I think that's when I really had to face like this may actually not work for me. And so I do think I started processing and feeling a lot of that grief quite a bit before I actually got to the point of, okay, I'm going to stop trying and really come to terms with the fact that I'm going to be childless permanently. Um, and so I think there was some grieving that happened in that infertility like period for me. And then there was definitely, I'm just trying to think about, like, I got my hysterectomy in 2017, like the end of 2017. And I would say for a good full year, I was just in really deep grief where I was just kind of doing the minimum of what I needed to do in life, but I wasn't doing great. And I was really in that grief. And then that's about a year after my hysterectomy is when I decided to start my blog, start my Instagram page, try to connect with other people who are also childless and start maybe working through it and processing it in a little bit different ways. And I think that's where I started finding some more like creative ways or ways that felt better for me to start like processing everything. And I was probably in that period for maybe like another year or two where it still felt really heavy, but it felt like there was some good like processing and like movement going on. And then I don't know, I think it just kind of gradually started shifting from there. So I would say in the last maybe 2 years or so, I don't feel much grief at all. So I don't know. It's I have moments still, and there are things that come up that I get sad about, but it's not anything like what I was experiencing when it first happened. So I would say there's probably good like 4 or 5 years overall where it was pretty heavy.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that. And you're right, there is no linear timeline. If yours was four, mine has to be four, and so on and so forth. But I will say that I found your page because of my work with Resolve, and choosing to be childless is not an easy choice. And when I was going through my journey, I didn't even know that could be a choice. I
Hmm.
thought it had to be adoption, foster care, egg donorship, I mean, there's all these ways to become a mother, IVF,
Yeah.
IUI, but I never really saw anything that said childless not by choice.
Hmm.
And I started looking that up, and I came across the Childless Collective, which is something that you work beautifully on. And it's this beautiful space for women like me and you and others to talk about this choice. So, can you tell me a little bit about the Childless Collective and how you came to find this path for yourself?
Yeah, definitely. So I think when I first started kind of working with the childless community, I wasn't even thinking about it in those terms. It was more I had needs that weren't being met because I needed to find some people that I could talk to that really got it and that could understand where I was coming from and that had that shared experience. So, I started with my Instagram account and a blog, and then I slowly did start meeting people who um, were like, "Yeah, I share this experience," and I made friends and I had these connections, and I started just kind of building gradually. So I think the first thing I did was decided to host a book club for Jody Day's book, Living the Life Unexpected. So I just rounded up some of the people I'd been talking to and we did a book club. And then I started running some over Zoom, like some online peer support groups every month. And so for a couple of years I was running those. And then when the pandemic hit, I was like, I would love to do a virtual summit because I had been seeing so many people who had inspired me in the way that they were talking about being childless. And so I ran summits for my work full time, but they all of them were in person and they were getting canceled due to the pandemic. So I thought, this might be my opportunity to try this out. So I started with summits. It was the summits have been amazing. I've done three virtually and have had a combined 8,000 people in attendance at those,
Wow.
and almost 100 speakers. And then this year in April, I did my first ever in-person summit, which had close to 100 attendees in Charleston, South Carolina, and brought in seven speakers from different places to, be to just have us all in one place to get to see what that felt like. So the summits have been really cool for me to experience, and I love being able to highlight all these other incredible voices in the childless community. And then 2 years ago, Jody Day approached me. So she's someone who's been doing work in the childless community for over a decade. And she's a lot of times, I think, the first person that a lot of people come across when they are looking into anything related to being childless not by choice, because she's got such a large body of work on it. And she approached me and said, I have an online community and I'm really wanting to expand the work that I'm doing into focusing more on what it's like to age without children and like putting more emphasis into that. And so, would you be interested in becoming the new host of this community so I have time to focus on other aspects of what it means to be childless? And so I quit my full-time job and moved into this role full-time, and it's been about 2 years now. But so all the work I do, I don't use Chasing Creation for anything anymore as a name. So everything's under the umbrella of Childless Collective. So I do, the summits. I have the online community, which is for childless women and non-binary people. And we've got about 750 members there, and it's a private community, and it is very vast in terms of like what there is to explore there. And it really encompasses all the reasons that could bring someone to being childless. So, my story is through infertility, but we have, a lot of people who maybe didn't meet the right partner, or their partner didn't want kids and they did, or I don't know, there's so many ways that people come to be childless that have nothing to do with infertility. And so I think those voices a lot of times aren't heard as often. But there's so many reasons. Like the longer I've been in the community, the more I recognize just how complicated it is and how varied our experiences are. So it's really a place for anyone who wanted kids and couldn't have them. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the umbrella of my work right now, and it's been really amazing to get to spend like my full time and all my energy in investing in this community and trying to create different spaces and different ways for us to find each other and have these conversations.
So, in Childless Collective, are they like subgroups within the collective for people who have maybe their partner wanted children and they didn't? Because that's something that, I never thought of, but I'm sure that's very prevalent. So do you have subgroups for people that have different reasons why they're childless?
Yeah, we do. We actually have, I don't know what the exact count is, but I think we have like 30 subgroups. So there's like a whole bunch of
Wow.
different subgroups of just I think what I realized as I started meeting more people in the childless community is that there's that thing that brings us together, that we wanted kids and we didn't have them, couldn't have them. But we have all these different identities or experiences that kind of intersect with that in different ways, and it makes our stories unique. And so I think it's really important that people are able to find other people who can understand their circumstances. So, when I was running my peer support groups, a lot of people who were childless due to being single were saying, I don't know if I totally fit in here, and I don't feel totally comfortable because like my experience is so different than everyone else who's here and sharing. And I think childlessness as a whole is an experience that doesn't really get like seen or validated as something that could cause a lot of grief, and really like understanding the impact from a societal level. But then even within childlessness, I think there are kind of dominant voices or experiences that we hear from a lot in terms of like, this is what it means to be childless. And there's a lot of people and experiences that are left out of those conversations too, that don't even have visibility within the childless community. And so, yeah, and honestly, a lot of the way that the structure is in the community was set up by Jody, and I think is really well done, because it does offer these like subgroups in different places for people to interact and have conversations with people who really understand their experience. So we do have a main area where everybody kind of congregates, and then we have subgroups, and we've got some of the subgroups are really fun stuff. Like we've got book clubs, and so it's also some of it's interest based, and it's pretty wide in terms of like what's offered there. We do monthly different Zoom events. We've got some in-person groups where if there are enough members and we have someone who wants to host, they'll do regular meetups in their local community. So it's really pretty expansive in terms of like what's offered and what's going on in there. So I like to think there's a little something for everybody, because it's really broad, like what we try to cover and the opportunities we have for connection. So
I think that's a really lovely way to put it because, from my experience, it was infertility. And when I was trying to find the support groups, it was people like going through IVF and
mhm.
me not being a candidate for it. I felt kind of like there is an ambiguous grief that comes with childlessness, and there's nothing really to show for it.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get the validation outwardly. So having this group of people that have these vast reasons and yet can still validate your experience, I think sounds very special.
It is. It's a really special place. And I think that there's so much healing that can happen in community. And there's a lot of healing that comes from being able to share something and they get that echo back of like, yeah, I get it. Like I know what that feels like. I've experienced that too. That kind of connection at that level can just really, I don't know, it just to me can be so validating and healing. And sometimes I think we may look for support in the places where we typically get it, like maybe with um, we have family or friends, or I don't know, just people that we typically turn to when we're having a hard time, and maybe they are like fully able to support us in what we need and in other ways, and maybe some of them are fully able to support us in what we need with this too. Like, but what I've seen from a lot of people is that maybe they go to the people that they usually get support from, and there just seems to be a disconnect in the other person being able to like truly understand what they're going through, or to be able to show up in the way that they need. And I don't even think it's anything that's like I'm not even like putting judgment on those people. I think it's I do the same. I think when there are people in my life who come to me with something that I don't have any experience in, or that I feel a little bit bewildered, like, and uncomfortable, like I don't know what to say, I don't know what you need, I don't know how to like make this better, and it can be really overwhelming. um and our friends and family, like, they're not our therapists, they can't be everything that we need all the time and hold everything for us. So I think that for me, like, being able to make connection with people who really got this and I could get the support that I needed, um was a really nice supplement and a way to be seen and validated and get like support that I was needing in the way that I needed it. And so I think that's true for a lot of people in the community.
I think community and connection is really a healing balm for grief
Mhm.
because it's so isolating. Even with your best friend sitting next to you, it can still be isolating because your grief is so in your head and it can be a very in your body experience.
Yeah.
What are some ways that you found really helped you on your own personal grief journey? Was it just community or were there books, practices? What did you do to find hope?
Oh gosh, I feel like there's so many things that were helpful, and I think I really tried out a lot of different things too, and some things worked and some didn't. But I would say the things that were most helpful, like definitely the community piece and the connections piece. Um, I think going to therapy, like having a really good therapist that I could process a lot of stuff with, that was really helpful, especially in being able to help me kind of think outside of the extremes that I was thinking in because I was thinking of it in really extreme, like, um, I don't know, like if I had become a mom, I would have been happy and had like fulfillment and experienced this love that I can't experience anywhere else. Like all these things that kind of you hear from societal messaging of like what it means if you're not a parent. And I had internalized a lot of that. So I was kind of looking at it as like motherhood was this like ticket to bliss and was this golden path to everything that I wanted in life. And if I'm not a mom, then I'm just going to be like sad and I can't find fulfillment and I won't know what true love is. Like I had these ideas about what it meant and what my life could be or couldn't be if I wasn't a parent. And so I think there like having a good therapist actually helped me to see where like those things just weren't true. Like and help me unpack some of those ways that I was kind of viewing it and framing it in my mind. So yeah, I think therapy was like incredibly helpful. Um, I did a lot of things that just were like I think just helping me get it out. Like I'm a big crier, so on days where I was just having a really hard time, like it wasn't uncommon for me to just get in my car and drive to like an empty parking lot and just turn on some music that I know would make me start crying and just like crank it up and sing along while I'm like sobbing and just let myself do that for a while and then come home and take like a really nice long bath. Like that felt great for me. And it was like a way for me to get it out physically and just kind of like tire myself out. And it felt like a nice release. So definitely crying. I felt like just giving those emotions a place to go feels really good for me. Um, Same thing with like processing some of the anger. Like I think just going to an empty parking lot and being able to like scream in my car when no one else is around or just like um, I don't know. When I was younger, I used to like jump on my bed until I was so tired that I couldn't like jump anymore when I was angry. It was just like a way of just like getting some physical release. But I think actually another thing that really helped was um, I started reading a lot of kind of feminist spirituality stuff and looking at archetypes and kind of like mythology. And I think that actually doing that helped me frame my experience in this larger perspective of normalizing some of what I was experiencing. So seeing my grief and my suffering as part of the human experience. And that in that way, I was connected to every other human on the planet. Like their grief might look different than mine, but like none of us escape grief. And I think there was something about being able to look at archetypes and like mythology and seeing how those are created out of these like shared experiences and what it means to be human. And there's something about expanding out that far that kind of put my suffering and grief into a context of, yeah, this really sucks. And like everyone has stuff that sucks for them. And there's some kind of like normalizing that felt really good to me and helped me kind of process my grief in like a much larger context.
What is it about the car? I just feel like I do the same thing. Like I could sit in a car and cry and Yeah, there's just something about the container of a vehicle, I feel. So when you said that, I'm like, yes.
I think it's like the privacy aspect of like if you can drive to somewhere like a parking lot or somewhere where nobody else is around. I don't know of anywhere else. Like if I'm in my apartment right now, if I screamed right now or was sobbing, like there are people, like my walls are thin enough, like my neighbor might hear, like my other neighbor might hear, my husband would definitely hear. So I think there is something about like if you can take your car, it is this like confined space, and if there's no one around, it does allow for like a privacy, I guess, that it's hard to find in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, and just to touch on the point of anger and grief, because that is I was so surprised by the intensity of the anger during my grief. I thought before infertility, I thought grief equaled tears.
Yeah.
And I think grief is such a teacher, just how you looked up all this archetypes and feminist mythology, you learned something. And the
Hmm.
anger piece was just like, there's so much inside of me right now that needs to get out. It didn't
Yeah.
have jumping, but I just was like, it was this physical, visceral reaction to everything around me. I was just angry.
Yeah. And I think that's so common, but especially when we're socialized as women, there's like a cultural expectation. I think that we're not supposed to feel angry, and like we're like there's a lot of I don't know, there's a lot that gets put on us societally about like how women are supposed to act and how we're supposed to feel and how we're supposed to express anger when it comes up. So I think that for me, there was definitely some unpacking, and some of it had started in therapy, a decade before this that had nothing to do with anything related to this experience, but just of, I remember being in a therapy session and my therapist said to me, I noticed that in all of our sessions that we've had, you're sharing things, and when I ask you how it made you feel, you'll say it made me sad, I was depressed, it made me feel whatever. And he's like, I've never once heard you say that it made you feel angry. And a lot of the stuff you're telling me about, there's like justified anger that would be a totally expected and normal response. And I'm just curious that you've never brought that up. And I think it really hit me. And I realized in that conversation, like, oh, actually, I I don't really know how to express anger. And my parents are lovely and very kind and generous and empathetic. And I never saw them really express anger. And so I think growing up, it really did feel like anger wasn't something that you feel or express. And it was a weird thing for me to have my therapist say, there is actually a place for anger, and anger is like a valid emotion. It's not like a negative thing. It's something that is also a part of being human, and you can find ways to like process and express that. And obviously you need to do that in ways that aren't, you're not going to hurt yourself or others, but there are ways that you can kind of like process that and feel it and explore it and let it out. And so, yeah, I think that in its own is like a good place to explore too.
Yeah, and there's so many different underlying emotions other than sadness and anger that show up. But I do think, and this is why I wrote this book, is that hope is one of them. Hope does
Mhm.
show up eventually, and it may not come in a certain amount of time, but there are glimmers here and there, and even finding community can be one of them. So,
Yeah.
or how, I should say, how did you notice hope reappearing in your life after this period of intense grief?
Yeah. I'll be totally honest. I think I still have like kind of a tricky relationship with the word hope, because it's it is a tricky thing to like navigate that relationship after you've been through infertility, because you're in this like hope despair cycle every single month of like maybe this is going to be the
Yes.
month, and then getting that like disappointment. And so I definitely think for quite a few years after, I really was afraid of hoping for anything, because it's like if you let hope into your life, then you are like there's going to be one of two outcomes. Either the thing that you were hoping for comes to fruition and you get to like have that and it's exciting and great that it worked out, or you could end up not getting it and you are setting yourself up for that like despair piece of being disappointed. And I think after so many years of infertility, it felt really scary to hope for literally anything because it just felt like I'm setting myself up to get back into this despair cycle and I can't go back there again. So there were definitely certain things where it felt like I don't want to put myself out there. I don't want to try. I don't want to I just didn't want to open myself up. I didn't want to take risks. I didn't want to take chances. I didn't want to hope for anything. And I think over time that has shifted because there are things that I've been excited about that have worked out and that yeah, the outcome has been on the side of it working out in the way that I was hoping it would. So I think in those ways, letting myself, I guess you'd call it hope. I don't know. I still feel like hope is just a really tricky word for me, but definitely letting myself be open to new possibilities and exploration and not just closing myself off out of that pain. I've definitely done it. I think it's still hard sometimes, but there's kind of a catastrophizing, I think, that I was doing where it was like, well, because this didn't work out, nothing's gonna work out. And it was taking everything to the worst case scenario. And so I think part of it was perspective shifting of okay, maybe I'm gonna apply for a new job and maybe I don't get it and that's gonna be disappointing. And so I don't want to put myself out there, but also it might work. And if it doesn't, I just learned that I can get through really hard things. And there's gonna be another job I can apply for later. Gonna be different than this one, but I'll be okay. So I think part of it is trusting, this process gave me trust in myself that I am someone who can rebuild and reimagine and recreate and that I'll be okay. So I think for me that's maybe what gave me the strength to put myself back out there again.
So it sounds more like resilience and openness.
Yeah, maybe so.
I can understand the contraction versus the openness. It's so easy to say no, especially after sorrow and anger, and just put up all the boundaries, all the walls, and try and pad ourselves from the possibility of hurt. And you bring up a really good point about the monthly cycle, the despair cycle, the oh, maybe it's this month. And if you go through it for years and you're trying to get pregnant, is that something that you see often in your community, the women that are still trying to get pregnant but are childless, or do they wait until they're done with that cycle of trying to get pregnant to join the Childless Collective?
So actually one of the criteria that we have for joining the private online community is that you're no longer trying to become a parent. So we actually don't um have a space there for people who are still trying to conceive or pursuing adoption or parenthood. Or if you're pursuing parenthood and you're hoping that that's still going to be a part of your future, then we actually ask that you don't join the community. So that's part of the application process, one of the questions that we ask, and that is because it's really hard to hold space for both of those experiences in the same community.
Mhm.
What I found especially is that for people who are kind of have accepted that they're not going to become parents and they're working on what that means for their lives and what's going to come next, and there's so much that has to be processed and worked out there. um it can be really hard to go back and hold space for somebody who comes in and says, i'm I'm still trying, but I think this could be a possibility for me. What should I do? And it can be kind of hard to hold space for someone who's still in that hopeful place. And it's hard too because I think there's a reality of, in some ways, our experience is kind of seen as a worst case scenario, and it kind of becomes like we're not really a community that someone's going to want to interact with when they first start trying to conceive, or when
Oh,
they're pretty
yeah.
new to infertility. I think for the most part, when people do engage with me or reach out to me who are still trying to conceive, they're kind of at almost the end of what options they may have, or what they they may be kind of at a stopping point. But anyway, I've just found that for the purposes of trying to create like a cohesive community, we've just kind of set those parameters around it, that it's really for like once you're in that place. Now, I do think with things like the Childless Collective summits that I've run, those are much more open. They're just open to the public, so there's anyone can join. I would love to see, maybe somebody's friends or family members that just want to learn maybe more about what their loved one's experience might be like. I think some of those sessions could be really helpful for them to understand the experience and maybe how they could be more supportive to someone in their life. So, I definitely get a lot of feedback from people who are still trying to conceive or still trying to become parents in some way, that have said, your stuff is really helpful for me because it helps me kind of see that this may be a path and there's community here for me if I need it. And it's helped me process or maybe explore things in a different way. So I'm always really like glad that that's the case. And I definitely want to be seen as a resource for people who are still trying to become parents. But the online community, I think there's like a little bit different level of like protection that I put there of what that's for in terms of processing. Because the other reality of it is too that I think it would be really hard to have people who are still trying to become parents who end up becoming parents and then having to have the whole community have to process people getting pregnant and leaving, or people adopting, or whatever it is that ends up working, to have to process that every time it happens. So those are, some of the reasons that I keep kind of that work separate. But anything else that I do, like, I host webinars. There's so much that I think is out there in the childless community that's accessible to everybody, and that would be really helpful for someone who is still trying to become a parent.
Absolutely. And there are support groups for every single stage of this journey, I think. And so I
Mhm.
love that you have that boundary and you do create a safe space for your community members for sure. Um, my final question that I like to ask all of my guests are, what are you grateful for currently?
Oh gosh, so many things. I mean, I would say in this context, like being in a place where working with the childless community is my full-time work, like that I am able to do this as like my job right now, feels really incredible. Because for 5 years prior to this, I had my full-time job. I was working at a nonprofit, and then probably putting about 20 hours a week into doing like different community building work within the childless community. So I was working like 50, 60-hour weeks if you took both combined. So being able to find a way to do this where I can just focus like my energy and my passion, and like what I don't know, I have a lot of ideas about like ways that I think I can create those structures that bring people together and facilitate that community and connection. I'm always like brainstorming new stuff. So to be able to just pour my full-time energy into that feels like a real gift.
Yeah, you're definitely a creator, and I love that you're constantly trying to find new ways to connect others and support people. That's just a really beautiful thing. Thank you so much for bringing your story and energy to this summit. Where can people find you and learn more about everything about Childless Collective?
Yeah, so the website is just childlesscollective.com, and Instagram is where I like to hang out. I'm not really on any other platforms. So, and that is also just at Childless Collective. So kept it really simple.
Awesome. And I'll link everything at the bottom. Thank you, Katie, for your time today. I really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
thank you so much for having me.